Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. Now, originally, this was meant to be a holiday special, which kind of played on the 12 labors of Hercules alongside the 12 days of Christmas, even though it was really going to be a 14-part special. Maybe next year, kiddos, when I can afford to kidnap a flock of editors. However, to supplant that, I have come up with something else to help cap off yet another year of excellent content growth. So the answer as to who I should do a mythological character study on for Christmas should be elementary. I mean, what else would you associate with Christmas? Other than corporatism, secular iconography, and a gift exchange practice which ironically enough promotes greed, materialism, and entitlement. That's right, folks! JC himself is on the chopping block today. However, Christmas is supposed to be a time of togetherness and setting aside your differences to find commonalities between people where you'd least expect them. At least so I'm told. So with that in mind, I've decided to do something I have never done on this channel before and will probably never do again. I've invited over another religious and philosophical figure who completely altered the way religion is viewed the world over to our proverbial Christmas get-together. Oh, stop looking so disappointed. You're watching Messiahs of Mythology on Christmas. You must be so lonely you're about 5 seconds away from hanging something else other than the stockings with care. Please don't do that. It's a stupid holiday. It's not worth it. If you haven't already read the title or looked at the thumbnail because you're illiterate, the Buddha has also been invited to today's holiday celebration. And there's a couple of good reasons I'm pairing these two together, because they have a lot in common. And I don't just mean the incredibly abridged surface-level analysis I just gave you. They are both historical figures who, despite their significance to their respective religions, are considered actual historical figures, with some vocal exceptions in regards to Jesus, but that's a whole other can of worms I don't dare open. They are both followers of an older, more antiquated faith before integrating their own philosophical teachings into schools of thought with various different disciples. They both have an absolute clusterfuck of different denominations of practice for the religion which formulated itself after their deaths, with some pretty substantial differences in terms of interpretation practices and even religious scripture. Both have stories attributed to them of immaculate divine conception through a spiritual figure entering into their parents' dreams. Both are seen as either divine figures in the mortal shell of men or merely just prophets by other similar institutions of faith. Both have had their physical characteristics misinterpreted multiple times throughout pop culture and the media, especially in the West. Oh, and they are both sometimes considered avatars of Vishnu. Yeah, I know this one is very fringe and the byproduct of a modern attempt at religious consolidation in addition to being a little retarded if you think about it for longer than 5 seconds, but don't worry, there is an actual basis for this. However, I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself here, with way too much ground still left to cover, so let's start out with the conception stories. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we start with perhaps the largest cliché shared amongst historically relevant figures with any sort of standing in the ancient world. Quote-unquote, virgin, not necessarily immaculate, birth. A sort of convenient plot device to heavily exaggerate the reverence the gods supposedly hold for a select few, usually royal, mortal men. Either that or the queen was sleeping around and the king had to explain why that child looked nothing like him. Amenhotep III was born from a virgin, Sargon of Akkad was born from a virgin. Hell, various different gods and goddesses throughout mythology are thought to have been single-player conceived. So it stands to reason that Buddha and Jesus would also be the sons of semi-divine, untainted women. Right? Oh, my sweet summer child. So let's start with the easy one. Queen Maya, the professed mother of Siddhartha Gautama, was never referred to as a virgin. In fact, she had been married to King Suddhodana for at least 20 years until Siddhartha rolled down the tubes, after which she promptly died. It's commonly accepted that Maya was a barren woman up until the Devas got involved, and so this story of conception is more akin to a Sarai in Genesis rather than a Mary of Nazareth. Maybe. I mean, officially, yes, but pragmatically, fuck, we're gonna need a whole other video to untangle those Christmas lights. So anyway, Maya lays down for bed one night and drifts off to sleep, only to rudely have her astral form ripped away from her body by a consort of Hindu devas, and then taken to a white elephant holding a lotus in his trunk, who circles the queen thrice before phasing into the woman's side. At which point she then wakes up, realizes that she's pregnant, and 10 months later, on the 8th of April, while visiting her hometown, she grabs the branch of a random-ass tree, and then little Buddha punches his way out of Maya's side and decides he wants to be born now, thank you very much. Little King Crimson Jr. over here. Which is probably why she died 7 days later and then was adopted by his aunt, who he put in her place when he grew up, and she basically became a Buddhist nun. Hooray for parricide? Well then, let's look at Mary and the absolutely convoluted story surrounding Jesus's Immaculate Conception, which is a term which does not mean the same thing it did back in the days of the early church. As I stated before, virgin births are a commonality throughout history, though the early church writers tried to do something different by claiming Jesus was born without the original sin of Adam and Eve, hence the immaculate part of his conception. This was later changed in the Middle Ages to be conflated with the virgin status of Mary as stated in Luke and Matthew, which may not actually be a wholly original idea to Jesus, as way back in Isaiah, the book where a child is prophesied to be born who is often confused with Jesus but is actually the child of King Ahaz. However, even this is a mistranslation, as the original Hebrew text states that the child was born of a young woman, not necessarily a virgin. So, the way many scholars today see it, Jesus was the divine son of Mary who was spelunked into her pussy by the big man upstairs in an attempt to make him immaculate. Yet this is all based off an older, reappropriated book of the Bible, which was mistranslated because the oily sodomites couldn't read whatever the fuck this is properly. And so the guys who wrote about Jesus some 70 years after he was already gone decided to just roll with it. At least JC didn't violently donut his mom because he was tired of being incubated for so long, so points for that, I guess. Now, this may or may not be a relevant point, but it looks like Joseph never got any 14-year-old pussy. That's how old Mary was when she gave birth to Jesus. Your local Christmas pageant has a habit of glossing over that little detail. Anyway, later Christian writings described Mary as an ever-virgin, which is problematic when you consider that Jesus has multiple brothers and sisters mentioned throughout the Gospels, but apologists like to write these away as merely his cousins, which is... No. Shut the fuck up. Why do you troglodytes want to cuck my boy Joseph the carpenter so bad? Especially given the fact that originally Joseph had a much bigger role to play in the life of Jesus than you might think. I mean, sure, he was the one to teach Jesus the trade of carpentry. Again, people forget this in the face of that whole King of Kings nonsense. But Jesus also bore Joseph's name. In fact, Jesus isn't his name at all. He was born Yeshua bin Joseph, or as my hapless American audience may call him, Joshua son of Joseph. The name Jesus comes from those boy-chasing Greek writers again who fucked up the translation, and the name just kinda stuck from there. Which is both a blessing and a curse, because now people don't get confused and think Jesus knocked down the walls of Jericho, but on the opposite side of the coin I have to explain all of this shit to you. Oh boy. Christmas is fun, isn't it? So, a little more of an obvious parallel between Jesus and the Buddha is the idea that Jesus came from nothing. Nazareth was considered to be a backwater shithole at the time of the Gospel's composition, as a humbled carpenter, to a religious philosopher and teacher who was evidently so good at his job his followers considered him to be the prophesied Messiah. Even though the Jewish community leaders have been giving that title away to pretty much anyone who showed the slightest sign of liberating the Holy Land from whoever the fuck was in control of it that month. Because if you read up on your history, Judah was a pass-along girl in the same caliber as Egypt. Now, it's important to note here that Messiah, despite what some people on the internet think it means, hence I'm supposedly an egomaniac, is actually a translated variation of the Jewish title Messiah, which in of itself is a word derived from the verb masa. No, I'm not shitting you. Which has a literal meaning, but also a meaning in terms of religious practice. It means to smear. However, in Jewish tradition, oil was smeared onto the shields and other objects of the state, thus making them anointed. This process was later expanded to rulers, clergymen, and Jesus himself, thus making these men messiahs, or those who were smeared with oil. So, what does this mean for your gracious and very handsome host? Does this imply that I take oil baths on the regular to get myself all greasy and lubed up? I can only imagine what some of you are going to do with that mental imagery. No, ladies and gentlemen, I go by this internet title because I have a bit of a history as a rapscallion, someone who went around smearing the long-established truth our political overlords would like you to blindly accept. And the same thing applies to mythological truths attested by the academics, both here on YouTube and at your local university campus. Wait until my Inanna in the Underworld video comes out. However, the title is twofold, as because I am an advocate for religious scripture being interpreted literally, as you may have noted if you watch Quadruple B, hence my title goes by its more literal meaning, the smearer rather than anointed one. Because trust me, nobody wants to associate with me, let alone anoint me. Unless it's the guy who gets to take out the trash at the end of the evening. With that side tangent, aside, let's think about the personal life of Jesus pragmatically. So, the nativity story aside, because that is literally the most convoluted story ever, and the professed accounts of whoever the hell wrote Luke and John had absolutely no business at all knowing what the fuck really happened that night, Jesus was a carpenter first, a fishing hobbyist second, and a religious philosopher sometime later. However, after his death, he resurrects himself, then fucks off back to heaven. Or, I guess, Japan, depending on how you're feeling about a 2,000-year-old conspiracy theory, wherein he is blessed by a number of titles, including but not limited to King of Kings, a Greek variation of the title Anointed, and, oh yeah, God taken human form. This is literally the equivalent of some Appalachian hillbilly saying something remotely intelligent once and then being hailed as God Emperor from that point forward by people who believed him. This is assuming, of course, that the Gospels heavily exaggerated or straight up invented the miracles of Jesus for dramatic effect. In stark contrast, though, you have Siddhartha, born into a life of privilege and prestige, the prince of the Shakya clan, which sounds good on paper until you realize that these people weren't exactly the pinnacle of India's caste system. The Shakyas were described as being, quote, of mixed origin, meaning that they were both Aryan, like the majority of northern India, that is to say a little more than passingly white, but also part of the native Indian population. This is important because India is racist as fuck. And that's coming from me. According to the laws of Manu, anyone who is of mixed race origin, or at the very least is part of a clan which has some kind of inter-ethnic breeding, is decidedly not Aryan, or as the Baudhayana Dharma Sastra puts it, outside the pale of the Aryavarta, which comes with several negative stereotypes, such as them being rough-spoken, of menial origin, incestuous, and most importantly for our purposes today, heretics. You see, the Shakyas were thought to be practitioners of a folk religion wherein the spirit of the trees were worshipped instead of the Vedic gods of the era, which many elitists in Indian society saw as an affront to Brahman, and anyone who dared visit them had to undergo a purification ritual upon their return to wash away the heresy of the tribe. So yeah, Siddhartha was a prince, but he was just a prince of undesirables. So when the white elephant impregnated Queen Maya, can't wait to see Rule 34 of that one, the child was prophesied to be either a great ruler or a divine prophet. And holy hell did Siddhartha pick the right career path, especially given the time frame he lived in. This point in Indian history was basically the 1820s in upstate New York, a time characterized by the adoption of new religious philosophies which radically shifted the goalpost of certain schools of Hinduism, of which Siddhartha had plenty of options to gravitate towards, especially considering that he came from a heretical family anyhow. However, the one he seemed to take a majority of his influences from is a familiar face on this channel. Ladies and gentlemen, courtesy of the Achaemenid Empire kicking India's ass, we now have Zoroastrianism, a philosophy which inspired Buddha to reject the moral absolutism of the Hindu clergy to establish his own brand of waxing philosophy, which unintentionally represents something else on this channel, which I'm going to have to cover eventually. Abandoning what little he had to pursue his personal side quest of obtaining enlightenment, Siddhartha wasn't considered a divine or even semi-divine figure up until well after he supposedly died. Later sources based on fringe schools of thought found that both Buddhism and Hinduism label Siddhartha as one of the 10 avatars of Vishnu, specifically the second to last one, as a holy man who would teach the populace to become enlightened to the true way of the gods so that their souls may find nirvana and be exempt from the absolute shithole which was the coming era of Kali Yuga, where, yeah, nobody shall be spared the wrath of the almighty Shiva. Wait a minute. A Gnostic hippie philosopher influenced by the ideas of Zoroastrianism rescuing the souls of the otherwise damned who may or may not be part of the same religion yours took a department from? Where have I heard that one before? So yeah, point is, what is in the mind of many religious scholars a major glaring difference between the Buddha and Jesus is in fact a striking similarity of a hometown hero with humbled origins mixing up the formula to become an exemplary leader of a new age religious cult, only to be bastardized by primarily white people. Oh, this next section is going to be fun. So, if you are new to this channel, or otherwise someone who walked into this video with only a very basic knowledge of who Jesus and Buddha are, you might be picturing these two chuckle fucks in your mind's eye. Typically, this is the westernized view of both men. You walk into a church and boom, there's a scrawny white Jesus letting out a sensual moan as he's nailed to a piece of lumber I can't afford because fuck Joe Biden. You walk into a Pier 1, boom, there's a fat ass they tell you is the Buddha whose head comes off so that you can stick your Oreos in his fat gut only for you to swing by later and stick them into your fat gut. As evidenced by my disdainful diction, both of these depictions are horribly wrong, but I'll get into Jesus first as he's a bit more obvious. So, with a name like Yeshua bin Joseph from a region of the world which is charitably Mediterranean, appropriately Middle Eastern, why the fuck would you ever assume Jesus was white? I get the fact that in the Middle Ages, the previously heathen Franks wanted to more closely identify themselves with their lord, so a few cosmetic changes were in order, but this is frankly just as laughable as the concept of black or Asian, with exception of Korean, Jesus. So, anthropologists nowadays have done facial reconstructions of what biblical Jesus may have looked like, and yeah, he looks like he wants to save me 15% in 15 minutes or less on my car insurance. Longtime viewers of my channel might know that I am unironically impartial towards the Korean depiction of Jesus, for reasons I got into my angelic hierarchy video. Shameless plug. However, I will concede that the truth would probably be somewhere in between Caveman Jesus here and Giga Chad Sigma Male Meat Grinder Abs Korean Jesus, if I reluctantly set aside my personal biases. Because the Shroud of Turin is now considered illegitimate, we may never know what Jesus definitively looked like, assuming he existed in the first place. However, I can tell you with absolute certainty that this Chinese chucklefuck who wouldn't look out of place in a Chuck E. Cheese is not Siddhartha Gautama. This is in fact the Buddhai, a traveling Buddhist monk from the 10th century in China, well known for his, distinguished appearance and for passing out sweets to children in the villages he frequented so that there would be more people who look like him. Buddhai is not at all a name related to Buddha, despite their similarities, as Buddhai means sack, a nickname given to the monk for his signature burlap which he kept on himself at all times to tote around the candy, meaning that Buddhai is more akin to a Chinese Santa Claus than a Chinese Siddhartha. But then that begs the question, how did the Buddha come to be associated with Buddhai? Well, it's pretty much entirely down to Western ignorance. You see, Buddhai was a pretty popular guy around China, only increasing in popularity after his death, A, because he is believed to have attained enlightenment, and B, he requested to be cremated after he died, but he didn't tell anyone that he had hid small fireworks in his pockets before death, which supposedly was very dazzling for the children to witness, though I can only assume some poor schmuck lost a couple of fingers setting that land whale ablaze. Likewise, in the following centuries, statues of Buddhai were set up outside Chinese restaurants, and in typical American fashion, we're only interested in foreign cultures when satiating our gluttony. Not to mention we're a nation primarily of idiots, and so the iconography of Buddhai as the Buddha of that one Chinese religion stuck. Yes, most Americans think Buddhism was invented in China. I love my country, but I hate some of the people I have to live in it with. As we have already covered, the real Buddha was Indian. However, he was from northern India, which means that, funnily enough, the Buddha is actually whiter than Jesus. Oh, this video is gonna piss some people off. And, yeah, that's actually all I have to explain, which isn't apparently obvious. Like I said at the beginning of the video, Jesus and the Buddha share a litany of similarities, but very few of them require elaboration. And while it's true I could extend this video out at least another hour going over the comparative mythology of the two of them, the majority of the information we have on the both of them are their religious teachings, which is a bit tedious to cover seeing as every denomination of Christianity and Buddhism interprets their respective teachers' philosophies differently. That, and I know most of you want to get into your Christmas celebrations with your families, so I'll leave it here with a false promise that I will eventually get around to covering Buddhism as a whole, the Nativity story, and my final verdict as to whether or not Jesus was actually historical in separate videos in the future. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, an update video should be coming soon for the end of the year in just a few days. I think it's abundantly obvious to everyone who watched last year's channel update that I am more than pleased with how this channel has grown over the past year. And it's all thanks to you folks at home. So, thank you for making this year really fucking awesome. And here's to 2022 being even better. However, it is Christmas. And in the spirit of giving, and because I'm so giddy about this next project I'm working on anyway, I'll let the cat out of the bag a bit early. Merry Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, and have a God's blessed day.